Hello and welcome to this episode of Latitude, in which we're going to look at what have been the achievements or the outcomes of Mr. Modi's recent visit to the US, which, as they said, was looking at addressing issues at the bilateral, at the trilateral, and then the multilateral levels. One thing is pretty certain, that Mr. Modi's visit has allowed India and the US in particular to overcome the watertight compartments in which we address these issues. And there seems to be greater connectivity in all these areas, with one overlapping the other and one complementing the other. And we have two informed experts who are going to educate us on the deeper messages that come out of such engagements. We have Ambassador Sajjanhar with us, a renowned diplomat, a think tanker, a policymaker, and also a commentator on a variety of international and global issues, both at his personal level and through his initiatives. And we have Indrani Bagchi with us, the diplomatic editor of the Times of India, who, as I have often said, writes some of the finest pieces on foreign affairs in her columns in the Times of India. I'll start with you, Ambassador Sajjanhar, sir. Quite clearly, the maximum focus of Mr. Modi's visit was on his engagement with President Biden. While there are those like me who believe that the real purpose of his visit to the US was to attend the Quad Summit, which was a great opportunity for him to engage with the other Quad leaders from Australia, Japan, and of course the United States. In his engagement with President Biden, which is not the first time he met him on a person-to-person level, but it was the first meeting Mr. Modi had with Mr. Biden physically as the President of the United States. So what is it that is new that has come out in the messaging that the US has given to India? After all, Mr. Modi seemed to have charmed President Obama and President Trump even more so. So what do you make of his engagement with President Biden?
I think first of all, thank you very much, Maroof, for having me on your show. I think the big message that President Biden gave was that the United States and the democratic establishment of the United States is willing and very keen and interested to work with Modi's India. Because you said very rightly, they met in 2014, 2016, they've spoken with each other. But, there were a number of voices that were being raised saying that, Prime Minister Modi had invested himself and identified himself too closely with Trump, with all these extravaganzas and also some of his comments. And also we'd seen that the vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, had also had some rather adverse remarks against Prime Minister Modi and the BJP establishment. So I think basically here it was to establish trust between the two governments, between the two countries, and to reassure each of them and also to the world, I think sending out a very clear message to the world that both of them were on the same page, that it is the interests of the two countries that would reign supreme, irrespective of whatever other issues there might be. And I think for the United States, particularly at this juncture, they needed India much more after, the rather chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. They needed India to be in their corner. And I don't think that either India was disappointed or the United States were disappointed looking at the very comprehensive joint declaration that has come out. Also, the meeting with Kamala Harris, in which she raised the issue of Pakistan's terrorist activities and so on and so forth. But staying with Biden, I think it was a very, not only the bonhomie, the camaraderie, the very easy sort of, extended handshakes and arm clasps and all that. I think it is the substance of the meeting also, which said that the relationship is not only going to move forward, but also reach new heights. Maroof.
True. I think Mr. Modi also enjoys the growing interest that the United States has in India, And of course, Mr. Modi does get a lot of credit for that, for continuing to pitch India in the right note. But Indrani, as I said, for me, what I was really looking at, what would come out of the summit meeting between the Quad leaders. And that apart, Mr. Modi, as we know, also had one-on-one with the prime ministers of Australia and Japan, other than Mr. Biden, who Ambassador Sajjanhar has just spoken about. What is it that really came out? Because it's being said that the Quad is now positioning itself as a force for global good. The Quad is also positioning itself as not so distinctly as a military alliance against the Chinese, though the Chinese had initially tried to show the Quad as a kind of a new NATO against the Chinese, but that's clearly not what has come out of the messaging from the Quad. And you've written also about that it's technology that's going to be the driver in this relationship between these countries, comprehensively all four and bilaterally also at different levels. Could you explain?
Well, thank you, Maroof. As you correctly pointed out, the more important meeting in Washington, D.C. was the Quad Summit. The bilateral summit was a kind of a stock-taking, kind of a review, but really not much more than that. And it was overshadowed by the Quad. As for the Quad, I know that it seems strange to suddenly describe it as something other than also a security arrangement, but let us remember that the full form for the Quad is actually the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It's not security grouping, in the sense that there are very strong security components to the Quad, and we should not forget that. While the governments are, certainly the Indian government is very shy of allying the Malabar to the Quad. The fact is the Malabar exercises are, if you look at the strategic intent, if you look at the operational intent of the exercises, it can be nothing but the security arm of the Quad grouping. As for the technology, I think any case, in my view, technology is foreign policy in today's world. And if you look at the way that four countries are actually working pretty well, I have to say, because they've actually hit on the right notes on the technology front, especially in communication technologies and 5G and beyond 5G. By setting standards, B, by opening it up as an open, they call random access networks, open RAN, and open RAN networks, and which means that you can have four disparate systems or four disparate vendors. So everybody's not forced to take one vendor, but you have a system which coordinates all four.
Okay. So well, that's quite sort of vast and comprehensive agenda they already have. They just probably need to fine-tune it further. Ambassador Sajjanhar, instead of laboring on Quad, I want to ask you briefly that Mr. Modi also interacted with some important CEOs in America, and these included Qualcomm, Adobe, First Solar, General Atomics, Blackstone. The last two have deep business interests in China. So what is the message that is coming out of his engagement with the CEOs?
I think, India is not pitching itself as, opposed to or compared to China. I think India is pitching itself as India, that this is what it needs, and it will go all out to get it. Ever since we did not join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, there have been a number of initiatives that have been taken by the Indian government, basically to make it a more attractive investment destination and a technology destination. And I think that is something, whether it is Qualcomm, we are looking at 5G, we are looking at semiconductor chips, whether it is General Atomics, we are looking at Predator drones. Discussions have been going on, but you need on the pricing aspects, on Blackstone, you need more investments. First Solar, again, basically we want to go from here 100 gigawatts to 450 gigawatts by 2030. So I think all these aspects are very critical and very crucial. And India wants to tell the whole world that it is ready to do business. So, number of initiatives, whether it is PLI or it is the removal of the retroactive taxation, or it is, Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat vision or something, all of these initiatives have been taken. And what we have also been saying is that today it is not only values that bring together India and the United States. It is both values and interests. And interests, of course, are strategic interests, whether it is fighting terrorism or countering or balancing China, or so many other things in the strategic realm. But in the bilateral economic and trade realm, this is also very important, and that is what Mr. Modi was trying to push.
Okay, well, that's thanks for giving clarity to that, because we need to understand that while they both merge together, there are separate verticals that India needs to be also focusing on within the bilateral realm of Indo-US relations. But
indeed,
after a break, we'll come back to look at the China factor, the Pakistan factor, and also the technology that would come out of some of these bilateral relationships that have now begun to gather momentum, but that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two informed experts who are throwing more light into what really came out of Mr. Modi's much publicized visit to the US. And we go back now to Indrani Bagchi. Indrani, explain to us a bit more about these things that we see now. The Quads seem to be very happy to step the gas on. For example, apart from the initiatives on having more and more vaccines, which slowed down a bit because of India's second wave and India's relative inability to cope with the promises that it had made. And now Japan and Australia are pitching in both with funding and distribution. What I'm more interested in is the semiconductors. I'm also interested in that what kind of technologies can Quad help India manufacture so that India's abilities are exploited to its fullest?
So you obviously have referring to that the part of the center of the Quad statement on semiconductor supply chain. Now, there are a couple of things here, I think. One is India's capabilities of becoming a semiconductor manufacturing hub is actually fairly low.
Okay.
We do not actually have the capabilities because there are a large number of reasons. What we do have, and in fact, if you look at semiconductors, they do come in, like there are three parts to them. The part that is of the manufacture, where it will probably always be the US or Japan and Taiwan. These would be the three countries that would do very well on the manufacturing front. We would not, and we should not even attempt it, because it would just be, by the time we get there, the world would have moved on ahead.
Moved on, right.
However, we do a very good job of is designing the technology and the design, because India still has a very large pool of extremely talented designers and technologies brain. So the idea ought to be ultimately to have synergistic sort of arrangements that could build the whole semiconductor supply chain. However, it's not like we cannot at all do semiconductors. We can, and probably much more in the lower end. For instance, in the auto end or in the other like television, etc. And those are the much lower ends. But for the absolute, whatever they call them, nano 5s or nano 6, or I don't know what the next one is, those, the top end manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing is really not India. India doesn't have the capability. For India to invest in that capability, to be able to do the kind of supply, access to water, to land, a whole host of things, India just doesn't have it. So it's much better that India applies itself to being a part of the entire supply chain. Rather than having everybody, having India build every part of it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair enough. Everyone can't do everything well. I mean, Taiwan itself, TSMC, seems to control the world's monopoly on semiconductor manufacturing.
Yeah, 70%.
But then again, I mean, India is not Taiwan, Taiwan's not India, and never be. Yeah, Ambassador Sajjanhar, sir, the China question. Whatever assurances the Quad gives, we all know one force that got it all together was China's expansionist agenda. Also, the fact is that China, we are the only country, at least currently in the Quad, that has land borders with China. And there is the maritime element also of our involvement with Quad countries, which China finds unsettling, especially in the areas in and around the Indian Peninsula. What is it that you feel that will allow India to engage with China bilaterally without brandishing the Quad sword, if I may say so? And how is it that Quad going to help us, other than making these loud proclamations about events in Afghanistan and Pakistan's role in it? Really, when it comes to that, it's very clear we have to fight our own battles ourselves. Your view?
Yes, you're very right, Maroof. You put it very well that, we have to fight our own battles. It is even when the revival of Quad took place in November 2017, we were talking really about maritime security. We never really talked about, territorial land security. And you're right that India is the only country which has borders with it. What China needs to do, I think we have made it very clear to China that if it wants that there should be, better, more cordial, more conducive, more greater comfort level in terms of our relations. China has been putting roadblocks in the way of Indian growth and development at every stage. And I take you back, let's say, to 2008, when it was the India-US nuclear deal. At IAEA, it was, China did not stop, any effort to block that deal. And more recently, whether it is India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group or India's permanent membership of UN Security Council, or even things like, the designation of Masood Azhar as international terrorist under the UNSC. So you look at every stage, and of course, in Galwan, what we have seen, the conflict, not to talk about what happened in Doklam in 2017. So I think at every step, China is trying to put roadblocks in India's growth. So if China wants that we should have more conducive ties, I think it will have to be more responsive and sensitive to India's concerns and India's interests. It looks at India's relationship with India through the prism of its relations with the United States. We have made it very clear, Maroof, whether when Prime Minister spoke at the Shangri-La dialogue, when he spoke about Indo-Pacific, he said it's not a strategy, it's not an initiative, it's a geographical construct. We have been speaking about the Quad as a force for global good. we have not mentioned anything. And even Foreign Secretary has said AUKUS is removed from this, Malabar exercise is removed from this. So of course, maritime security, last word here, maritime security, in my view, should be and will be a very important element of the Quad, whether we say it or not. But I think the ball is very much in China's court as to how it wants to play it for India.
Yeah, understood. Thank you very much. I think that's very true. And Indrani, last question to you, and I think we need some more wisdom from you on this one. And that is the Prime Minister's speech at the UN. All sorts of assertions have been made, but Foreign Minister Jaishankar apparently tweeted 12 big policy takeaways from the Prime Minister's speech. I'm not going to repeat all 12, but a couple of them caught my attention. One was, United Nations must enhance its effectiveness and reliability. There are questions on that count. And I think it's about time somebody spoke about that, because I've always had a problem with UN's effectiveness. Although Pakistan swears by those UN resolutions as though they were the 3 commandments from heaven that created Pakistan. The second aspect is the transformational role of technology in our daily lives, and how this can play an important role both for India's growth and global growth, and the resilience of global supply chains. Clearly, it's a broadside on China. So your views.
Well, your first point on the effectiveness of the UN, I think it's high time, as you said, somebody called it out. The UN really has become a bystander institution. In all the major conflicts, in all the major developments in global politics, the UN is actually a bystander. I mean, Afghanistan is the latest. Myanmar is another. The UN just cannot seem to take a view forward, and remains locked in a battle between China, US, and Russia. The point is not that. The point is the way the system is structured. And the way the system is structured, there's nothing to do but to have a deadlock. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed. I will not hold my breath about changing the way the UN is structured. On your second point, technology in daily life, actually, if you notice, it's a common thread by the Prime Minister, and it's a good thread, which is look at your 2 big ones, UPI and COVID, 2 huge platforms that actually take digitization to the retail level. Very important,
right.
And scalable, exportable, etc. So yes, I would say that these are all very, very important aspects of.
Okay, I'm completely over the top with timings, and thank you very much. This is a subject we could have discussed it twice over or many times over, but thanks very much for your contribution. Thanks for watching until our next episode.
Thank you, Maroof.
Thank you.